Hey there, and welcome back to the channel. Today I am doing an interview with subject matter expert in interventional radiology, Stacie Buck. Stacie and I talk about interventional radiology, which in the past we've mentioned is one of the more lucrative niches in medical coding, and we actually talk just in general about niching down as a medical coder and potentially get into more of a consultant role, as well as just Stacie's story. So I really hope you enjoy this interview. Let's get into it. So I am really excited to have Stacie Buck here today. Stacie has 29 years experience in the healthcare industry, and during her career, she's served as an internal auditor, as corporate compliance officer for one of the nation's largest providers of diagnostic imaging services, and she served as vice president and consultant for a radiology consulting firm and radiology billing company. She has served in consulting capacity for a very long time, and she is a very sought after national speaker about things like interventional radiology and radiology coding. She's authored articles on radiology coding and reimbursement topics for Healthcare Business Monthly, for the Journal of AHIMA, for Radiology Management, and the Journal of AHRA. And she served even on the editorial advisory board for a lot of different radiology publications. So Stacie's a member of the Radiology Business Management Association, the American Healthcare Radiology Administrators, American Health Information Management Association, AHIMA, and the Florida Health Information Management Association. And she's done a lot of contributions over the years. I mean, an amazing amount. I shadow in comparison to everything that Stacie has done over her career. She's been recognized by FHIMA as Distinguished Member. She's been an Outstanding Professional Award. She's gotten the Distinguished Service Award, the Literary Award. She's a Triumph Rising Star. I mean, Stacie has just done anything and everything, it seems like, out there. She graduated magna cum laude from Florida International University. She has her bachelor's in health information management and her associate of arts and business. So Stacie, thank you so much for taking time out of your amazing career to come and talk to me and my viewers today about your journey and about more about interventional radiology and that niche as well, because there's definitely been some interest surrounding that from my audience.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be with you. I've been watching you for a while, so it's nice to be a guest on your awesomely successful YouTube channel.
Well, thank you. So you've talked a lot, and I've listened to your podcast. And one of the things that really spoke to me was your journey from going to a coder to a business owner. But for my viewers that aren't familiar with your story, can you tell us a little bit how you kind of have voyaged into the coding realm?
So I'll try to keep it very brief because my story is kind of lengthy. Like a lot of people in this industry, I just kind of fell into it. When I talk to a lot of professionals and you ask them, did you want to be a medical coder? Or is that your first career choice? A lot of people didn't even know that it was something that existed, just like a lot of positions in health information management. So when I went to college, my first semester, actually got a job in a medical records department as a file clerk. And that's when I learned about HIM, and then it just kind of went from there. I didn't necessarily set out to be a medical coder. When you go to school and you end up getting a bachelor's in health information management, typically you're looking at an HIM director. At least back then in the 90s, it was looking at HIM director positions. And so that's kind of how I saw myself, going, in that direction. And it just didn't happen. After I graduated from college, I was interviewing for, management positions, and they just, even though I had job offers, they just weren't the right job offers. And so I actually passed on several job offers for management positions. And I ended up going in a different direction and took a job as a revenue analyst for HCA Healthcare. And I was a corporate employee, but I worked in one of the facilities. And so that was my first job I had out of college. Before that, I had worked in a traditional medical records department for 6 years, and I had done different things, filing, analysis. I'd done a little bit of coding, but nothing. I worked in a rehabilitation hospital. So it was like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. Coding's very redundant, nothing much really going on there. It's diagnosis coding. So that was the extent of it. And then when I was working at HCA, I was doing charge audits, and charge audits were absolutely awful. Like looking at like a $100,000 like hospital bill and trying to account for every widget in the medical record on that stupid bill. That was awful doing that. But while I was there, they assigned me the responsibility for doing laboratory compliance audits for them. So I actually enjoyed doing that because now you're doing the coding audits and, looking at also the revenue side of that. And so I enjoyed that part of it, but I didn't like the charge auditing part of my job. I was commuting a really long distance. The facility I worked at wasn't a fan of, didn't like most of the work I was doing. And so that's how I ended up at US Diagnostic, which you mentioned that in my introduction there. The diagnostic imaging company. I was their first and only internal auditor. So they took me on. They were very impressed with my work experience, even though I didn't have any experience in radiology and I had never done what the position was calling for. I needed to start an audit program for them and do audits and do education. And that was really where I felt like I fit. Like I realized that I enjoyed the coding, like auditing, and I enjoyed doing the education. And then I also started looking into getting into compliance, and I wanted to become a compliance officer. And actually there, I eventually got promoted to corporate compliance officer and still had all of my audit duties like underneath me. Nothing went away. There were a lot of changes in the company, restructuring, positions eliminated, combined, you know how that goes. But I didn't mind because now I had the experience of corporate compliance officer in addition to what I was doing with the auditing. So that was how I ended up in radiology. And I just really liked it. Now, at that time, I wasn't doing any interventional radiology at all. I tried to learn, couldn't understand it, went to different seminars, read different books, and I'm like, I cannot get the hang of this, which was extremely frustrating because I'm a very good, like self-taught person. If you give me a book, I can typically teach myself how to do something. And I just could not learn like for the life of me. So I gave up on it for several years and didn't do anything with it until fast forward, many years later, I ended up actually working as a partner in a billing and consulting company with someone who had been a VP at US Diagnostic with me. He had left, he had purchased one of our imaging centers. He built one of his own imaging centers. So he had a management company to run those centers. And then we also wanted to do functions for them and then do consulting. So I went and joined up over there. And what I found is that so many people were wanting interventional radiology consulting, and I didn't have the ability to do it. And we were having to hire 1099s to do that. So I finally said, okay, I have to find a way to learn this. Finally connected with the right instructor when I went to a free seminar, then went into training for medical asset management. Some people out there may be familiar with them. They actually offered the first IR credential before AAPC ever offered the credential. And a lot of people don't know that. So I was certified through them with a CIC, Certified Interventional Coder. And then a year later, they made a deal with AAPC to suspend offering their credential, and then, did whatever they did with AAPC for the CIRCC. So that's how that kind of evolved. So that was back in 2007. I got credentialed. Was it 2007? Yeah, 2007 through them. And so that's how the IR piece came together. So I know a lot of people say, interventional radiology is like super hard. And, how do you get into that? What kind of coding experience do you need? And I usually tell people, like, it's helpful if you have some core coding credential or you have some coding experience. But let's face it, I was doing laboratory CPT coding and radiology, diagnostic radiology CPT coding. That is a far cry from interventional radiology. There's very simple to very complex. I had nothing in between. I just went from one to the other. So it's really just putting in the time and learning that specialty. I think that anybody can learn as long as they keep at it and they don't give up. It is not something that you learn overnight. You will not go to a seminar and learn it. I did a week-long seminar, crash course, cold, no experience. Oh my gosh, totally overwhelming. And it took me about a year to actually get the hang of it. And I had someone auditing my work for an entire year before I felt comfortable. And then I went out and started teaching it a year later. But you have to constantly work at it, be exposed to it on a daily basis. You can't take a seminar and then not do it. You will lose everything that you learn. So it's just one of those specialties that you have to be completely immersed in it to master it. But anyone can do it if they'll put in the time.
Yeah. And, I think that brings up a very good point. One of the things I've heard that are great about online courses They say that there's so much information on the internet, you can teach yourself just about anything. And I think if you're someone who's very motivated, you probably could pull all the CPT assists and all the Fed registers and all the coding clinics and figure out some of it for yourself over time. But there is a huge time savings with going through a program like yours, where they're giving you the information in a more direct fashion, that you're not having to piecemeal everything together yourself. And that time saving is worth a considerable amount, because that you don't have to spend the year and a half compiling all of the articles from the interventional radiology societies and so forth to figure out how things are working and how to get things, clean claims submitted and paid through the insurance companies and all of that. So I was recently reading, and I love about how you kind of stumbled onto a niche. And I was recently reading, the common path to uncommon success, and it stresses about the perks of like niching down until it hurts. And that's something that you have been focusing a lot on medical coders. I've been talking a lot of people have been talking about niching down in medical coding. And I think it can be very, very lucrative for a medical coder to niche down, but there's also a benefit to kind of having that just wide sort of general knowledge, knowing a little bit about credentialing and knowing a little bit about reimbursement and maybe a little bit about each payer. What's your take about kind of being that jack of all trades versus that master of one or two particular specialties?
There are definite benefits to, having that, niche that you're known for. It can be very lucrative, but there's also a downside to that as well. So I only do interventional radiology and diagnostic radiology, consulting, education. That's the only thing that I do. There are several areas that overlap with that I don't do. So when clients come to me and they have a broader scope that it starts to extend out in some of those overlapping areas, I don't have the ability to assist them. So I have to pull in other people to assist me. So that's a little bit more manageable because there is expertise out there. I can tap into other people. But what happened to me several years ago, my business was doing very well, business like crazy, like could not like keep up. I mean, things were just rocking and rolling. Then when we got into those last few years before ICD-10, came into effect, when we were going through that transition, I had a 3-year period where I had very little business and I was like struggling to pay my bills like during that time. And those were the leanest 3 years that I have ever had. And the reason for that is because everybody was putting their budgets and their money into ICD-10 implementation and training. And most of the people that I work with are hospitals. I work with facilities more than anything else, even more than physicians. And so they are hiring companies that do the whole package. I'm just like one specialty. So they don't need someone like me and they don't have the budget to look at these other areas. So I wasn't getting really any consulting work during that time. So that was a struggle. And what started to shift me out of that was when I started my online course for interventional radiology. How it got started, I never planned to do it. There was a client of mine, she wanted to take her CIRCC exam and she's like, do you have any training for that? And I said, no, I don't. I said, but I will tutor you one-on-one. We'll work out, a rate and then, we'll take it from there. So I did like an 8-week boot camp with her. And then she took her exam and she passed it. And I'm like, you know what? I think I have something here that I could actually, offer. And so I started offering 8-week boot camps, limiting them to 10 people. We would do them live and had great success rate with people passing the CIRCC exam. And then the people in the boot camps were like, you know what? 8 weeks, we still need longer than 8 weeks. It's a lot in like 8 weeks. That was the feedback I was getting. So then I'm like, okay, let's offer this course. Let's do it for 6 months. And then eventually, okay, let's offer it for 12 months. And I moved from doing live to completely on demand. So now it's 24/7. It's accessible to whoever's enrolled. And they have 12 months of access to complete the program, which is different from other programs that are out there. Like the one that I took and other ones that are still out there now, you go on site for a week, they cram everything into your head, like in a week long seminar, and then you leave. You can't absorb all that in a week. By like day 2, halfway through, you're just done. You're not going to absorb anymore. Then when you leave, you don't have any support. There's nobody there to ask questions to assist you. So when you're enrolled in the course, you have Q&A with me for 12 months during your enrollment periods. If you're struggling with something, you can reach out. So it takes time to learn it. You can't learn it in a week. So it allows you to learn incrementally. So that, when I stumbled upon that, that is really the direction I have taken my business, is with the online course. That is how I make most of my income right now. And it is my plan to continue that way. I don't do a lot of consulting. Honestly, I don't want to do a lot of consulting for a lot of reasons. I'm kind of like over it. And I used to do big contracts, and I used to have a lot of 1099s working for me. And it's a headache having people working for you. I won't get into all of the problems that can arise with that. But I like working more independently and having more freedom. And by having the income from the online course, I work part-time right now. I don't work full-time, and I actually do very well. So I want to grow and expand that. So I felt like if I had hit on this sooner, I wouldn't have had the struggle during those 3 years when things were so lean. It's like I had all my eggs in like one basket, and that hurt me. So then I have the course. And so now I'm like looking at, how the course has progressed, and it's doing well, but I would have thought it would have grown even more by now. And so now I'm looking at how the industry is going, and I'm like, I kind of feel like I have all my eggs in one basket with the course. So I'm trying to explore other options for online education, and possibly bring in some other, people to work with me, because I don't want to have all my eggs in that one basket, even though it's a lucrative basket. What happens if it goes away, especially looking at technology and taking over coding functions? Like a lot of production coding, I hate to say it, will eventually go away, a lot of those jobs. Now, is it going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years? Seriously doubt it. It's going to take a while. But looking at like artificial intelligence and what that's going to do for coding, particularly something like diagnostic radiology that's like very redundant, AI can probably master that pretty quick. CAC hasn't been that great. It's very inconsistent, but I've been working on some AI development with the company, and it's been interesting. I'm excited to see what it can do, but I see the role of coders changing, where they become more validators, and you just don't need a bunch of people sitting in a room coding. So it's going to change the job function, because the coders are going to be teaching AI how to code more accurately as they're giving it feedback. It's eventually going to learn, and it will be able to replace you. But yeah, that's probably 10, 15, 20. You know how it is, slow adoption of technology in our industry.
Right.
You're familiar with that. It takes a long, long time to get people on board.
Yeah. And I've actually been working on a couple of projects involving AI programming as well myself. And it is interesting to see, as you're kind of coding through things and figuring out how could we train the AI to pick this up. There's still a lot of nuances. Like, there's certain things that I can look at this and go, oh my gosh, this was definitely a subcutaneous debridement, but the provider didn't say this, and this, even though I can tell that this is what was done. That's not what the documentation says. Or it might be that there's certain things that are omitted from the documentation that drove me to a certain code. So I definitely see there being, like you said, that slow progression of efficiencies kind of happening over the years. I do think coders will not lose their jobs. Coders will still exist, just in a different capacity, a different function. Obviously, the fact that, some coding will be more automated is not going to eliminate the fact that there are going to be providers out there that are going to have still programming problems, that are going to intentionally try to take advantage of some of the regulations. It doesn't mean that it's just a free-for-all, that we can just bill everything automated. Or even if we go on a federally funded healthcare program, again, that doesn't mean that the doors, floodgates just open and we can bill whatever we want. We still have to even make sure from a statistics standpoint that the data is correct. So definitely changes long down the road, but yeah, excited about that as well. I think those that maybe have that concept that medical coding is, you just pick this and it translates to this code, like some of those functions, yeah, definitely those are going to get automated, very straightforward things. And we will shift into probably more of an auditing, quality assurance type of role.
Right.
Now, you talked a little bit about how you were working in compliance, how you were working in different capacities, and then you kind of stumbled into interventional radiology. Do you think it's better for coders to kind of stumble into their niche, like get in, get started, get their feet wet, and then find out kind of what they like? Or do you think coders can kind of target a certain specialty that they want. Like I know I have a lot of coders that they're like, what's the biggest, highest paying thing? And I'm like, okay, well, DRG validation, interventional radiology. Like, can you just target that and go, I'm going to go and get my CERC, and now I'm going to be an interventional radiology coder? Kind of what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, you can. I mean, you can target something, but what I've learned in my career is you may not necessarily like the thing that has the big dollar amount attached to it. If you are miserable doing it, then what's the point? That job that I took as a revenue analyst, I got a $10,000 pay increase when I switched from one job to another. And that was one of the reasons why I did it. And I absolutely hated that job. And I knew a weekend I hated that job. And it took me a year to find another job. So that's just, the reality of the situation. I've been very fortunate in that I've kind of just fallen into things. But I've had jobs that I didn't like at all. Sometimes you just take a job because you need a job. A layoff situation, I've been in that. I needed to take a job. I ended up working in home health. I really hated that. Thankfully, they laid me off from that job. I was thrilled when they laid me off from that job. Actually, I remember, so I'll tell you this funny story. This is getting off kind of like on a side tangent here, but I did not like this job. I had been interviewing like crazy, like trying to get out of this place. And one day I got called into HR, or my boss said, when it's lunchtime, please come over to my office. I need to talk to you. And I'm like, I'm going to get laid off today. Now, the funny thing was I was going to quit that day. I was going to resign, even though I hadn't found another job because I was fed up. And so I told the one office manager, I'm like, they're going to let me go today. He's like, no, they need you. You've been doing too much for them. And I'm like, no, they're going to let me go. Because a lot of people have been laid off, restructuring, whatever. And so I went to her office and she's like, okay, she's like, come with me to HR. So what's coming at that point. And so they're like, we're sorry, but we have to let you go. We're happy with your performance, but we've been making these changes, which I understood. I was, one in a long line of people who are being let go. And so I'm sitting there not saying anything and sign all the paperwork for the severance pay, all that, that you do, all the formality. And I wasn't saying much. I was very silent. And they're like, are you okay? I think they thought I was going to lose it or something, that I was really upset. And so I just said, actually, I'm great. I go, I was going to quit today. And the looks on their faces was priceless, because if they had just let it go, over one more week, they wouldn't have owed me anything. So I had my severance, I had, a little bit of vacation paid out, and I could collect unemployment now until I found something else. And so that was kind of funny. And then from there, I went into another job where I started getting involved in E&M, auditing. I hated E&M auditing. I hate E&M. I give a lot of credit to people who do E&M. The reason why I don't like E&M is because of the subjectivity of E&M. I like it to be more concrete, more black and white. Now, no area of coding is completely black and white. We know that. But E&M is the least black and white, I feel like, any area of coding. Whereas when you're doing procedural coding, it is more black and white. So I did that for a while and I didn't like it. And then the person I was working for, he was a bit of a bully and a jerk, and we used to butt heads, and I'm like, I got to get out of here. So I left that job. So I've done a lot of things that you just learn that you don't like them, and you move on. I tell people, don't be afraid to try something new. I mean, worst case scenario, you just stick it out and you find something else. Some people feel like they have to go to a job and they have to stay there for a certain amount of time. And you really don't. I mean, if you're changing jobs every 6 months, that's obviously going to look problematic. But don't feel like you have to stay somewhere, because let's face it, if the employer wants to get rid of you, they'll get rid of you and not think twice about it. Right. So there's nothing, wrong with trying out different things. So again, I think you can target certain things, but you may find out you don't like doing them, and you just keep trying. If you're trying to break into coding for newer coders, I tell them, take any coding job you can get, because you and I both know that it can be very difficult to land that first job. That whole, right. Well, how do I get experience if no one will hire me? Everybody wants experience. Right. So I tell people to get your foot in the door, look at HCC coding. That's one of the easier ones where you'll see CPCAs, can get those jobs. Diagnostic radiology coding, lab and path coding, like the ancillary stuff. Just do something, or get into billing. Just start somewhere rather than holding out for that big, first paycheck. Most coders do not hit the jackpot, right out of school, finishing a program or getting credentialed. It's just simply not the case. It happens. There are people who come out of school and boom, they're making great money, right away. But that's not the typical story. And for me, fortunately, when I was going to college for my HIM degree, I was already working in the field. So that helped me. I never had an issue where, I couldn't find a job. It's like I had job offers I was turning down because I had the experience and I had the degree. but it's just trial and error. And like I said, I trained on software for a while for a company. I didn't like that because I was traveling every week and I got bored training on coding software every week. It wasn't challenging.
Yeah.
So you just keep going at it until you find, what clicks. And some people get into coding and they don't like it and they change the thing is, I think that a lot of advertisers kind of do a disservice about coding, and they make it seem like it's one way, like the work from home, easy job, kind of thing. And it's not like that. And I think people,
the magazine ads that say that you can work from home and make an X amount of dollars and you won't have to pay for daycare because you're going to be able to take care of your kids at the same time that you're coding, because they don't have any real idea kind of what coding is like.
Yeah, I think people have a wrong idea of what it is. And then you even have some people who go into programs and then quit programs because they realize like how intense it is, and it's not for them. And coding is not for everyone. It isn't. And unfortunately, I had an experience working for a private institution briefly. It was a horrible experience, but I quit there. I was not even there 2 months and I quit. I just couldn't deal with how they ran their program. But they were bringing people into this coding program, and these people were paying $14,000 a year to be in this coding program. And this was back in the early 2000s. So insane. So they were getting either grants from the government or they were pulling loans for the balance. So these people were in debt, and they're throwing people into coding programs that don't belong in coding programs. Like the quality of the students, it just wasn't there. Like these students were and the funny thing was they were enrolling people in a coding program without a coding instructor. They already had students enrolled in the program. I was the first coding instructor that they hired, and they needed to hire someone right away because they're finishing up medical terminology and we need to send them on to coding. And so and they were all like failing like medical terminology. Like they weren't even passing medical terminology. And I'm like, not all of them, but most of them. And I'm like, this is kind of a problem.
Right.
So there was they say, oh, well, we have like entry, like exams, like entrance exams, not to assess if somebody is a good fit for coding. You're just doing a general, admission type test. You're not really looking at these, whether or not these people have what it takes. And a few weeks into teaching these people, I'm like, I would say like 80% of this room does not have what it takes, and they are not going to be successful, in this business. And people would jump programs. Oh, I started over here in phlebotomy and that wasn't working out, so I came over here to medical coding, or they're just jumping around. I'm like, oh my, it was like unbelievable. And then just personal issues I had with them, and just a lot of, headbutting. I just like quit one day. I emailed them one day. I'm like, I'm not coming in tonight. And so then the secretary started teaching medical coding. The admissions secretary was teaching medical coding until they found someone.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but sometimes it's genuinely even just that the admissions people and the advisors have no idea. They're just general academic advisors. They're looking at a book of jobs and they go, oh yeah, it says here that you can work from home and that you can do this and that. And they tell the students, and the students, they take their word for it. They're like, yeah, they told me that I can work from home, and that it doesn't matter that I have 3 kids at home, and that I'm going to make $50,000 starting out because that's the average salary. And that's all they're kind of focused on, and that it's not going to be a hard job. And I think there is a little bit of a misconception that, and it's starting to turn a little bit now that we're seeing a progression of more work from home jobs, but there's been almost that thought concept that because it's work from home, that must mean it's an easier job to do. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's quite true, especially for something with medical coding that is productivity and accuracy based. It's very difficult to do a high percentage of quality and a high percentage of quantity when you're being distracted by a lot of other things going on at the home. And you also have to consider, and this is something that I don't think mentioned during schooling, but HIPAA compliance. If you're working from home, you have to have a private office. A lot of employers want you to have a locked door. They want you to have, a secure internet connection. It can't be that you're sitting at your dining room table with your uncle running around and your kids running around while you're looking at patients.
People need to have childcare. That's an expectation that people don't realize. You have to pay for childcare. You're not allowed to be attending to your kids' work. That's people have a rude awakening about that when they're trying to find a job, and they have to meet all of the requirements.
And that's not to say that those jobs aren't out there. There absolutely are jobs out there that will allow you to take care of your kids. but we're talking about a small amount. So if you're
Yes.
someone who's starting out and here's the pool of jobs that you can apply for, and now you're just looking for one particular thing that's going to allow you to have, flexible work schedules and you can have your kids at home, that's a very narrow opportunity that you have now for positions that you can apply for.
Yeah,
So
that's where if you're looking for that, you want to look more for 1099 positions
Mhm.
where you're working as an independent contractor, because then
Yeah.
you're not going to have those stringent requirements on you. Like when I used to use 1099s, all I said to them was, tell me how many hours you're going to give me. I can figure out approximately how many, encounters you can get coded in that time. As long as we can meet the expectation of the client, we meet production. I don't care when you work or how you work or what you're doing, as long as the work is done. Like for me, I'm pretty easy to work for. I don't care. If you're producing, do what you want. You can sit with 10 cats crawling on your desk, a kid on each hip. It doesn't matter as long as you're getting the work done when it's supposed to be done. So if you want more flexibility, like some people just need that or want that,
Right.
that's the kind of work that they're going to need to look for. A full-time employer, that's where it gets more challenging, where if you're working for a facility or a large company, then they're going to have a lot of these parameters in place. And so that's not going to allow you the freedom that you want to. Or you can be like me and you and start your own business and have your own thing. Then you have more freedom and control over, where you are and what you're doing. And initially, it doesn't always start out that way. I used to not have much control over my schedule and worked like a crazy person. But now I've created a situation where, I have freedom and I can do, what I want and work how I want and where I want and, when I want. So that's kind of like a longer term. I think a lot of people kind of see themselves doing that, but they don't necessarily know how to get there. But it's possible. I mean, I think, I'm sure we're going to cover, I'm going to hold my comment because I'm sure we're going to cover this. So I'm just going to stop right there because I could keep talking.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things to consider too when you're getting into 1099 work, because it's not for everyone. It's great for like if you're a mom and you have coverage for health insurance through your husband and all the benefits, and you don't have to worry about that. If you're someone that has to pay for your own liability insurance and health insurance and dental, that's a little bit more of a consideration there. And that kind of is a good transition into our next concept. So, I've seen a lot when we have high profile people in the industry that are working as senior consultants or VPs, and suddenly something happens in their company and they are no longer with a job. One of their first thoughts is, oh, well, I'll become a consultant. I'll go into work for myself. And it's not as easy as people seem to think it is. They think that, you just open up shop and people come flying in. And then a lot of times I've seen these people who were starting as solo consultants in a couple of months, now they're back to a corporate job again. Mm-hmm. So what happened when you went solo? Did you just open up shop doors and everyone went, oh, Stacie's consulting now, here, let me just sign the contract and we're going to hire you?
Well, my situation was kind of interesting when I went, out on my own. So I had always thought about going out on my own. I had different times where I was out of work, through layoffs, whatever, different things. There's a lot of changes in healthcare, and a lot of people find themselves out of work because of restructuring, things of that nature, mergers and whatnot. And so what ended up happening with me, so I was a partner in that one billing company and consulting company. And I had a really great deal there because I had a base salary and my benefits were paid for out of the company. And then I was able to keep 75% of my consulting fees. And so I was doing really well. So I had no reason to leave and do something on my own because it was like I was already working for myself. I had control over my schedule. I could come and go as I please as long as the work gets done. It was like I was working for myself, but I had that security of a direct deposit every 2 weeks. And I had a pretty darn good bonus structure with the consulting. Who gets 75% of the consulting fee? Nobody gets that. So I was doing very well. So my partner in the company, he decided, I'm getting out of healthcare. I'm done. It's too stressful. I don't want to do this anymore. Decides to sell his imaging centers and close down the management company. So I'm like, what do I do? Do I go find another job? Do I go out on my own? And I didn't want to go work for someone else because working with him for 3 years, it was like I was working for myself, and I couldn't imagine going back to the 40-hour-a-week grind that I had before with other people. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm like, now is probably it's time to do it. It was like I was forced into it. I wouldn't have made the leap from something that was so secure. So there was one small client that we were like working with that re-signed with me. You know, we ended the contract with the one company. They came over with me. It was only like $2,000 a month. It was like not a big contract. And then during the time that we were, you know, closing down, you know, this company, there was another client that we were talking to about doing some consulting for him. And he decided he was going to sign a contract with me. And we had structured this where he was supposed to pay me, I think it was like $8,000 a month or $8,500 a month. It was a consulting fee that I was allowing him to pay in installments over 6 months. This was the agreement. And then it outlined what I was going to be doing for him. Well, he gets done with like 1 month and then he decides he just wants to cancel the contract. So I had what I thought a nice salary for 6 months to help me ramp up and get other clients. And so he decides, nope, done, not happy with you. He breached the contract. He was a real jerk. And so I had to get an attorney involved in this. And then I ended up getting a settlement out of him. Didn't full on go to court over it. The attorney's like, your contract is solid. You are entitled to every cent of this money. You know, he's the one who breached the contract. He's like, if you want to take this to court, he's like, we can win. He's like, I'm confident we can win. He goes, here's the problem. He goes, people like that will never pay you. He goes, just because you get a judgment, they will find a way to not pay you. And when I called my attorney, he already knew of the guy. He knew the name. And he goes, you don't? He goes, oh, I hate that guy. He's like, you don't want to work with him. So he already knew of him and his reputation. And so we did a settlement. And then here I was in this situation where, you know, the settlement wasn't that big. I'm like, okay, like we settled for like 2 more months. I'm like, but what do I do, you know, after that? So that was a very rough start. And so that was the end of 2008 that happened. And then 2009 was extremely lean. And I had a lot of challenges in 2009. I was down to making like half of what I used to make, a little bit less than half actually, from, you know, my job before. And so that was a real struggle. And then I had to move out of the house I was renting. And then I had to find a house to like buy. And it was not a good time. So many challenges. I talked about it in one of my podcast episodes, just going through that. But then when I hit 2010, for some reason, business just like exploded. And I had like more business than I could handle in 2010. And the biggest contract that I've ever had to this day, I signed that year, at the beginning of the year, was Emory Department of Radiology, doing coding for them. I had a team of 8 people doing coding for them. It was a huge, you know, contract for 2 years. And so that was amazing. And just a bunch of other stuff like came, you know, in where I couldn't even keep up. And I had a bunch of other people assisting me. So I don't feel like there was anything in particular that I did that made that happen. I think it's just when you're out there, like over time, like more people learn about you. Like when people say, well, how do you get clients? You know, and I said, honestly, I find that most of my business comes from people seeing me speak. They like know me. Like paid advertising has never worked. It's not worth it. It's just being out there constantly and becoming known as that subject matter expert, and people will find you. So for me, people will see me at a conference, you know, maybe listen to a webinar. Right. Someone who's used me will refer and say, hey, Stacie was really great. You need to use her firm. And some people will find me on a Google search, which completely blows my mind that they stumble upon me because I don't even do any paid SEO or anything. And they find me, you know, in that, you know, pond with all the big fish, and I've gotten business that way. But that's really what it is it's just putting yourself out there. Once people know you, know your name, and it's synonymous with a certain specialty, that's really where it starts to take off. But even with that said, your business is going to go through ups and downs. Like it has since 2008, I've been doing this, and it's constantly like this. You have a really great year, and then you could have a not so great year, and then you could be, you know, I'm like, can we ever get to the point where it just kind of stays up here and does this instead of some years like that? Although I have to say, COVID year 2020 was my best year I had in a long time because everybody was home and wanting to do online courses. Employers were paying for people to take the online course because they didn't want to cut hours, you know, for coders. So they were letting them do the course on the clock and paying for it. So that's where, you know, I was kicking myself. I didn't have other courses available in the beginning of 2020. That was all that I had. And then this year I did a diagnostic radiology course and barely anybody signed up for that. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't promote it a lot, but I'm like, if I would have had that last year, I probably would have made more money off of it. So there's something to be said about that, not procrastinating, because I was procrastinating on the one course for a long time, and other ideas I've been procrastinating on. And so I can't procrastinate anymore. I got to get something else. I got to get something new going for 2022. So I'm exploring some different ideas.
Yeah. So that's interesting. When the pandemic hit, I actually hit initially this huge crash, like right when everyone was when they stopped ambulatory surgeries and stuff,
Mhm.
elective surgeries. That and everyone was getting paused or laid off or whatever, crashed. My business
Yeah.
was doing terrible. And then as soon as everyone went back to work, they're like, "Oh my gosh," and those bonus checks from the government came out. Then everyone went, well, I need to invest in my career because I don't want to be in a situation again where I'm potentially going to get laid off. They're like, I'm going to go and get another credential. And that's when things started peaking back up. So there is definitely an element of getting things in at quite the right time, having that right product at the right time.
I mean, who would have thought that what we saw last year would happen? I mean, you think medical coding is like job security, that's
Right.
not going to go away
Right.
ever for any reason. I mean, technology affects it to a certain degree, and outsourcing to other countries, we've seen that affect the profession. But I'm like, to see so many coders like laid off, like furloughed, I'm like, this is something I would never, ever think I would
Right.
see in my lifetime. And even healthcare providers were being like laid off. I mean, that was just mind blowing to me to see how that occurred in like a 2-month span of time, how that completely decimated the healthcare industry and so many people were out of work. But now people are hiring like crazy, especially vendors. And I'm thinking that providers probably are going to rely more on vendors rather than, this is the trend I seem to be seeing because of that, the uncertainty maybe where you don't want to have the full-time employee and all the costs maybe associated with it. If the vendor can do it, and if the vendor can bring people in quicker than maybe you can, because I can't ever remember seeing vendors hiring as much as they have in the quantities that they have, as I've seen like in the past probably 3 to 4 months. I would say it's really picked up a lot.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I tell some of my viewers when they're getting into medical coding. They're like, oh my gosh, my local hospital, they outsource all of their coders. Does that mean I can't find a job? And I'm like, well, that doesn't mean there aren't coders working to code the cases for that hospital. It just means they exist at a different company, a vendor company that probably has much more well-trained coders, because instead of just being a coding department of 10 people in that hospital, they probably have 150 different coders that they all are paying for their membership fees or their CEUs. They know all the stuff that coders do and have the resources available and more plentiful in that organization. So it's not that there isn't coding positions. It's just that seat to code those cases has moved into a different company. I mean, of course, there is, like you talked about, there's a difference between outsourcing versus offshoring. And, that's, I think, a battle for basically every industry that we're seeing right now is the offshoring. So medical coding is not exclusive to that in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. So moving along, though, you talked about your business structure, about, the consulting, and now you're doing a little bit more of your online courses. You've opened up your podcast. So you're trying to monetize, it seems like, now in different ways. What current part of your business structure are you really, though, the most passionate about?
Definitely online. I want to find other educational opportunities and put them online. That is really where the demand is like at. And I feel like that is one of the areas, regardless of what happens, like, in the field, even if you have coding jobs, that are being outsourced or whatever, you still are always going to need coders who need education, regardless of where they're located, regardless of where they live. That need doesn't go away for quality education. So if you have that available, you can always make money. I think if you're good, at, teaching and like educating and whatnot. It's interesting to see a lot of people who do things, and I attend different programs, listen to different things, and I'm like, the quality isn't equal on what's out there. You've probably seen that too. There's some really questionable quality on some stuff out there from like experts and people. I'm just like, or I've listened to webinars and I'm like, okay, clearly this person is talking about IR, but they are not an IR SME, and they just made several incorrect statements about it. So not all things are equal. And I think you've talked about this in one of your, YouTubes, that you did about paying, for a quality education. I think you've like addressed that. Everybody wants, something for free. And I understand that because it can be costly, but sometimes you have to pay that extra money for the quality education versus just, let me just knock out some CEs over here. Look, I see so many coders, they just get their CEs just to get their CEs. Let me go find, free ones I can earn. And I'm like, but you're not really expanding your knowledge base.
Right.
How are you bettering yourself as a coder? I don't understand why someone wouldn't invest some money in something. I mean, you don't have to spend thousands of dollars to do it, but at least to spend, invest a little money here and there. That's what I don't get. You're just doing it to check the CE box, basically. I've earned them all. I don't really care about these things, but what are you doing to improve your skills? Try to learn another specialty. See if there's something else, that you like, doing. Myself, I'm like old and cranky and I don't want to learn something new. So I don't, because people are like, do you see yourself doing anything else? I'm like, no, I don't want to learn something new. I want to find ways to partner with people who have the knowledge and expertise and create mutually beneficial relationships. I don't want to be the expert in those other spaces. I don't want to start from scratch in something else. That's just not where I'm at. That's not what I want to do. I've always wanted to create an online business around coding education, multi-specialty. That goes back to 2007. I had this idea on how to go about that, and it just never happened for a lot of different reasons. And again, it's one of those things, I really should have pursued it back then, even in spite of the obstacles, because boy, I'd be way ahead, of the curve, and I would have a lot of content, and I would have a business that is mainly like online. But just the consulting, one of the reasons why I want to move away from the consulting, I mean, I do take on stuff I can do myself. Like I said, I don't like managing large teams of coders. It's just a lot of headaches that you don't need. But it's like with all the regulation that's like in the industry, that becomes, I think, more difficult to navigate, particularly like for a smaller business owner. Like one obstacle that I hit, and this was only with one facility that I've hit this problem with, but I anticipate it might become a problem in the future. It was a longtime client of mine that I was doing coding for, and they updated their business associate agreement. And so I don't read them in depth. You kind of, browse through them. They all pretty standard, say the same thing. Well, this one particular section caught my eye about insurance coverage. And it was specifying all the insurance coverages that I should have and in the amounts that I should have them. And I'm like, wow, I've never seen a BAA get that specific about that. It's about safeguards and things, the standard stuff. I'm like, that's interesting. So one of the things that I had in there, I mean, I have professional liability insurance. That's something we all should carry. I think even if you're just an employee somewhere, it's not a bad idea to pay a few $100 for that, just to be on the safe side, truthfully, should something happen. But they wanted cybersecurity insurance coverage for my company. And I'm like, well, I don't really understand why I need cybersecurity. I'm like, I'm acting as a remote coder in my role. I'm not storing any data. I'm just going through your VPN, looking at the records, coding. There's nothing, I have no control over your information. It's not stored anywhere. And so I was going to insurers and asking them for quotes on, I gave them verbatim, copy, paste, this is what I need, my client is requesting, and they're coming back and they're giving me policy quotes. And I'm looking at these policies and I'm like, you're not giving me what I need. You're giving me general liability. You're giving me professional liability. It's not cybersecurity. And then I would keep pressing them. They're like, oh yeah, you're right. We don't offer that. And I contacted multiple companies. And the problem I was having is that, well, you're too small. We don't do business with companies like yourself. Like there's not, we just don't do that for like the solo person. We work with larger entities. Okay. So I finally went to a broker, and the broker is like, well, I don't know what I can find for you, but give me some time and I'll get back to you. And he came back to me because I can find only one company that will insure you. And he's like, they want to charge you $10,000 a year for the cybersecurity policy. And he goes, so I know you're going to tell me no. And I said, absolutely, I'm going to tell you no. I said, because nobody wants it other than this one client. And at that point in time, they weren't even paying me $10,000 a year. I mean, they used to pay me like 6 figures a year in the beginning. And then over time, we whittled things down and their staff was doing more. A lot of my contracts have always been structured that way. And I'm like, no. And so I ended up canceling the contract with them. But when that happened, I'm like, am I going to hit this issue with other providers who are sticklers and want these things in place?
Yeah.
That I really, unless you're going to throw me a lot of money, I'm not going to do that for you. That's not a hoop that I want to jump through. Now you can, with the professional liability insurance, they have an additional cybersecurity that you can get. And so I do have that if someone asks. That's why I like the online thing, because I can still use my knowledge and expertise and then make money working in healthcare, but without getting into the weeds of healthcare. I just feel like all the years with the coding, the auditing, all that, I'm just kind of over it. I don't like being stuck behind a desk. That's,
Yeah. And being set to a certain set of hours, like you have to work from 9 to 5. And if you're not working 9 to 5, you have to tell us and explain to us exactly why you're not doing that. So there's two things that you mentioned that I want to touch on. And one was the CEs. So you were talking about free CEUs and how there's a lot of places out there that you can get continuing education for free. And a lot of people are like, yeah, I just need to get my 36, check the box. And there's nothing wrong with that with the people who they're not as passionate about medical coding. They're just in it because they need a paycheck. They like Legos or whatever, and they just want to get their paycheck to go spend it out on Legos because that's what they enjoy doing in their spare time. But when you're looking for something specific, like if you're really struggling with E&M and the Novitas free ones aren't doing it for you, that is absolutely the point where you have to pay for a more premium product where people are going to really walk you through the process. And that is worth the money to invest in yourself and your career to pay for that more premium workshop to talk you through those problem areas that you're having. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. And the other aspect that you were discussing was about, there are the experts out there. And I think one of the things that we've discovered now over the past year and a half is, especially with the pandemic, we've had some teachers who are phenomenal teachers, absolutely brilliant, know exactly what they're talking about, but for some reason either can't translate that appropriately into like a workshop or teaching someone else, or that whole online learning concept is just beyond them. They struggle with the Zoom meetings and the functions and getting microphones and how to demonstrate how to work things in the online environment. So I think that's a transition we've seen as well, that there's people now who are utterly brilliant, but translating that into an online education type of thing, they might not have that skill set anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've all been to those, seminars or those sessions where we have like the subject matter expert and they're like the smartest person in the room, like they really truly are. But when they're trying to convey their information, you're just like, oh my goodness, it's super painful. But they're the smartest person on it, but they're not good at articulating it in an easy to understand manner to the audience. And so that's what people say about me. They're like, I like how you can take something complex and make it simple. And so like when people tell me, oh my gosh, it finally clicked with interventional radiology when I saw you, I'm like, that's the highest compliment that you can give me, that you finally had that light bulb moment, that aha moment that helps move you forward. And then once people have that, that's what happened to me. I connected with the right instructor. It was a free seminar, actually. A vendor sponsored it, but the instructor was amazing. And when he was teaching it, I'm like, I got it. And he worked for medical asset management at the time. And that's why I ended up going and taking their week-long course, which unfortunately he taught day one and then he was not there for the rest of the week. And I'm like, are you kidding me? But that, I had that moment with him after all those years of struggle. And so when people tell me that makes me feel good. That's, with the course and with my book that I wrote, what I did when I created this is I created the course and the book that I wish I would have had when I was trying to learn. If I would have had my materials, I would have been able to teach myself with my materials. So while there's a lot of information out there and there's a lot of stuff out there, and everyone knows who the big name in the space is. I'm not even going to say who the big name is in the space. We all know that. He's great. And, that's who I go to when I need, references and a second opinion and things. But when you're a beginner coder, like when I was first learning, I couldn't understand what he was saying or anything, that was published in the books. And the same with other publications. It was challenging. So I've just taken it down to like a more basic level. Yeah. So I tell people, depending upon where you're at with your coding experience and knowledge, your exposure to IR, I'm like, it really depends on how much experience you have, like what the best choice is for you, whether it would be my course or whether it would be something else. You know, if you're experienced, you may find my course too basic and you don't need to invest in it. So I mainly target people that are brand new to IR coding with like little or no IR experience. That's how I approach my teaching. I assume that you're coming into this specialty green, haven't coded it before, where other programs, there's a certain level of knowledge that's assumed. And if you don't have that, then you're just not, you're going to be lost in those programs. So it was a progression over time. Stuff that used to never help me, then eventually, as I understood what I was doing, then I'm like, oh, now these other people and resources are helpful to me because I have the basic understanding.
Yeah. And I love when you're able to just make things to these little digestible chunks that you can take that one piece and be like, okay, now I understand this. I think that just makes it so much of an easier learning experience. Now, I consider myself someone to be kind of an unlikely entrepreneur. And did you ever see yourself going into entrepreneurial services, being independent, or did you kind of think you were just going to go on that traditional path and kind of climb the corporate ladder?
Yeah, well, early in my career, I mean, I didn't really think about doing my own thing. It's, you know, I think when you're younger, you don't, some people think, you know, big picture like that. I mean, I guess I always kind of in the back of my head had this idea like, oh, it would be cool to have my own, you know, business, but never really seriously considered it. It wasn't until I got into the industry and had more experience, I actually did start my first side hustle consulting business was back in, I think 2000. I started that and I just started out doing like HIPAA consulting. Back when HIPAA was coming in and people were needing policies and procedures and education, I was doing that on the side. So I had been working in the field for 7 years at that point, 8 years at that point, and I had finished school. And so I kind of had that going on the side, but I never felt that I could step away from a full-time job and do that. I was my only source of support. You know, that's the other thing. It's like, okay, if I don't have anybody else to rely on. You know, some people, you know, if you're married and, you know, you can rely on your spouse, sometimes they can pick up the slack short term to help you build something. You know, when you're on your own, that's it. And you don't have anybody to help you, bail you out, loan you money to get started. It can be a very scary thing to transition. So again, the idea was always there. I'd like to do this, but I never was pulling in enough business on the side to make that transition. And then, like I said, I was forced to do it back in 2008 when that, you know, opportunity that I had was going away. And I'm like, well, now's the best time to do it because at least I have some income coming in. I have, you know, these 2 clients. Of course, the one did what he did, you know, so that gave me the confidence to then make the leap then. And there have been times when business has been very lean, particularly those 3 years. I considered taking jobs, like full-time jobs, like somewhere else. And I would talk to other companies, but what I always found or I would try to get like side jobs. But here's the thing. It's like when you're doing like a side job and you're getting paid by another company as a 1099, you're making this much money compared to making this much money when you're doing it on your own. And so that's a hard pill to swallow. But what I found is that whenever I'd be getting ready to sign the agreements like that to do 1099 work, something would come into my business. It was kind of like, you know, the universe is like, hey, no, you're not supposed to go that way, you know, stay over here. And I even had some great job offers. At the lowest point in my business during that ICD-10 transition, I had a great, you know, job offer from a company that I've been doing 1099 work, you know, with. And I told them, I said, 10 years ago, this would have been my dream job. I would have like jumped on it completely. But I turned them down and they were shocked because they knew my business was struggling. They knew what I had been going through. Like I said, I had been working with them. I was very open with them about my situation because we had off and on talked about how I could possibly, you know, come to work, you know, for them. And I just, you know, nicely told them, I said, look, I said, it only takes one contract to change my life overnight. And I said, I would rather roll the dice and see whether or not that happens rather than go work for somebody 40 to 50 hours a week who's going to own me and I have no control like over like anything. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I'm like, so I'm just going to stay the course and I'm going to keep going. So when I hit those lean times, I just keep going forward because I'm like, I don't want to go work for anyone else. I don't want to do it. And the other thing is too, I don't take all the business that comes my way. Some things I turn down. Even when I need money, I will sometimes turn down business because I'm like, I don't want to do this. It's going to make me miserable. And people are shocked that I say that. And I'm like, no, I realize not everybody's in a position to do that. I mean, if you need to put food on your table, you're going to do what you need to do. In my leanest years, I was putting groceries on a credit card, so I know, what that can, be like in those certain situations. Everybody's like different, but if you can keep pushing forward, it's like, I feel like a lot of us, this is when I do my motivational talks, I talk about this, that we're very like reactive to things. Like we're constantly reacting to things that are thrown at us rather than thinking about what we're paying our time and attention to. So when we're evaluating what we're going to do, we really should be asking ourselves, this decision that I'm making, is it going to move me closer to where I want to be? Or is it going to move me further away from where I want to be? And we all have taken detours in life. I'm not saying that, you have to just keep pushing forward no matter what. Sometimes you have to take a detour and do something. But I feel that we don't spend enough time really considering the cost maybe of some of those choices. And I'm guilty of it myself. I mean, I have a lot of regrets about things that I haven't done and opportunities that should have been taken or jumped on. And people are like, well, how can you say that? You're so successful. I'm like, do you know how much more successful I could be if I hadn't been a slacker and a procrastinator, and made all these excuses for things? Or you just get so focused on, I have to take care of this in the moment. Yeah. And when life throws stuff at you day after day after day, you're constantly reacting. You're being reactive rather than proactive. And, that's the case with so many of us. You just get caught up in that daily routine and you feel like you can't get your head above water, but you really have to take that time to say, okay, what is one small step that I can take to get me closer to where I want to be? I've always been that all or nothing person. I'm either all in or I'm not going to do it. That does not serve me well, being that way. Now, when I'm all in, it serves me well. But when I don't feel that I can 100% jump into it, I won't do anything. I don't want to do it unless I'm assured success and I can give my all. And that just prevents you from making progress. So there's so much more, I could have done. And again, that comes with age. When you're young, you're stupid. You think you know everything and you really don't know everything. And you get older and you realize that. Like going back to the business I wanted to start back in 2007 with the online education. So the person I was working with in the billing company, he said, well, if you want, I'll invest in that company as a startup. He's like, I'll give you your seed money. He's like, whatever you need, I'll be a silent partner. And he's like, I just want 25% of the business. And I said, well, for how long? He's like, forever. I'm like, I don't want to give you 25% of my business, like forever. Can't we like pay you back and give you, some, interest on your money or whatever? And he's like, no. He's like, I want to be part owner of the company. And I'm like, forget it. Well, all these years later, it's like, okay, well, guess what? 100% of nothing is nothing. If I had taken him up on the offer, I could have had another business going on, another stream of income long ago where I wouldn't have been going through these leaner times. So yeah, you're giving up 25% of future earnings, but again, I've done nothing with it 14 years later. And so there have been zero earnings. So I would have been better off doing that. But again, I'm like, that just didn't seem fair to me if I was the one doing all of the work. So
right.
It's just really like trying to evaluate opportunities and not be short-sighted and reactive. And like I said, when I do motivational talks, I talk a lot about that. Or because most of the changes in my life, circumstances have forced them. It's not been chosen. It's been like, well, now I'm here and I'm being pushed in this direction. And that's not necessarily the best way to do things. I mean, it can work out. It's worked out well for me, but it's like there's been a lot of wasted time. I think that we just spend a lot of time not moving forward and getting caught up in things that, maybe don't need as much of our attention as we give them. And like binge watching Netflix. Don't even ask me what I've been doing lately with Netflix binge watching. I watched Virgin River, all 30 episodes in like 4 days or something like that. It was insane.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it's tough sometimes to set boundaries. That's something I've struggled with for a long time, that anyone would throw an opportunity at me. I'd be like, oh, well, yes, of course. Yes, of course. And then my plate would overflow and overflow and overflow. And I've had to really kind of pat myself on the back for being able to say no to things. I used to do a lot of speaking engagements. I don't know how you've been handling speaking engagements lately, but a lot of them, they want you to come and speak now virtually around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Well, it's dinner time. I have other committees and stuff that I have that want to meet at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. I have a young family. I can't take 6, 7 dinner nights a month and have them away from my family. So I've had to kind of start telling people, like, I would love to come and speak at your chapter. The first availability I have is February of 2022 because I can only do 1 or 2 a month because it's just too much. But yeah, it's tough when you're like, oh, these people want this from me and
Yeah.
I could do this
Yeah.
and this is great. It is tough to set those boundaries, but you have to do it for your own personal health and well-being.
Yeah, I used to be the workaholic that never told anybody no. Whatever they needed, whatever they wanted, I would do it. I would take care of it and handle it. And then I went through a lot of health issues in 2010 and I couldn't work and I was bedridden for like 8 months. And that was life-changing, going through something like that, because things get done without you doing them. It also teaches you what's important and how to scale back. And after I went through that, I became really good about setting boundaries with things and saying like, no. I was someone that never told people no. And when I started saying no, people were shocked that I was saying no. But it's just something that you have to learn to do. And again, I think that comes with age. The older we get better at setting our priorities and setting those boundaries and not feeling guilty about setting, those boundaries. Like you talk about speaking engagements, there are certain ones I just don't do. Like a lot of chapters, like I had people from California want me to speak at a chapter meeting. Well, I'm East Coast and their meetings start at 6 p.m. They're talking like it's 9 p.m. here. I'm like, that's not happening, for me. I'm sorry. Or, people ask for Saturday meetings. I'm like, well, I don't work on weekends. Occasionally I'll do it. I don't say I never do it, but I don't book a lot of those. I don't put anything on my schedule that is going to stress me out or irritate me, because I used to do a lot of things that I'd be like, why did I ever agree to this? I don't even want to go do it. And I would be miserable doing it. And now I don't do that. I want to show up, whether it's virtually or in person, and enjoy what I'm doing and enjoy being there. And I don't work on the weekends. I take off Fridays. I rarely work on Friday. I do what I need to here and there, but I've just kind of set, this is how I work. This is when I work. And, I'm blessed that I can work my business around my personal life. Like business is kind of secondary to me. I can still meet the needs of my clients and do what I need to do, but on my terms and my schedule. And I can just go and do whatever I want. And I love that. And I can't believe how I used to be versus how I am now, when I was that person working 60 hours a week and was miserable, making great money. I mean, great money, but it wasn't worth it. And then the health issues and just everything that followed with that. It just helps you, reset. Hopefully you reset your priorities after experience like that. Mm-hmm. It was a horrible experience, but it was also a life-changing experience, and just a lot of things that I did working on myself after coming out of that, and making myself a better person. And, just realizing that I wasn't happy. I was so busy all the time. It was like, I'm avoiding things in life through busyness and constantly working and volunteering, and people see the successful, like, wow, look at the successful person. I want to be her. Like, I'm so envious of that. I'm like, you don't know what's going on behind closed doors or internally with someone. I'm like, it all looks pretty over here. It's not pretty behind the scenes, at all. So it's really, I think in this profession in particular, we have a lot of stress in our jobs. Let's face it. If you're coding, it's productivity and it's compliance, and people are like on you. It's never ending. It isn't like, oh, my work is done. It's day after day after day. It never ends. There's never ends like what you're doing. And it is super stressful for people. And I know a lot of people who work crazy hours, long hours, work 2 jobs, been there, done that. So it's a matter of hitting, that reset button, and just really, not looking back now, how can I say it? It's like you miss out on the important things, like the things that were more important. Like a lot of years were wasted, like having quality relationships and, things like that, and spending quality time versus working. So it's like, I have this, years ago when I was sick, I'm like, well, I have this resume a mile long and all these accomplishments, but here I am in a situation where none of it means anything. It's completely meaningless, right now for what I'm going through. It's not helping me, really. And really, who really cares, in the grand scheme of things. So these things that we think are important sometimes just become lesser important, over time. And so I guess it's one of the reasons why I started my podcast. I haven't gotten into that self-development and self-help stuff yet, but I want to go there because I think we're so good at getting our technical training, about our craft, but we don't spend time, bettering ourselves internally. and really digging into some of those things. So I want to share some of that work that I did with like other people. So I'll go, in that direction with the podcast at a certain point, because I feel that's more valuable sometimes than that technical, time that we put in, just, making ourselves better. So we're better for the people that are around us. I mean, you want to be a better mom, obviously, to your children, you have to make sure you take care of yourself so you can do that, for them. And that's just the struggle. We have so many competing priorities, but I think COVID kind of helped people slow down and appreciate those things. So I think there was a benefit to something horrible happening, that people have changed a lot of things because of that, just how they do things and how they approach things. Yeah. And we've been talking a really long time. I know we were scheduled for 30 minutes. We break it up into a two-parter.
I might have to. I'll timestamp it. It'll work out okay. So if people want to skip around to certain parts, they can just go. So you've provided a lot of great information through your podcast. I see a lot of your tips popping up. Where can my viewers follow you online?
So I would say probably the best place to follow me would be on LinkedIn. That is where I spend most of my time, social media wise. I do have some Facebook groups on Facebook I have one for interventional radiology coding, one for diagnostic radiology coding. All they'd have to do is search for RadRx, interventional radiology coding, RadRx, diagnostic radiology coding. You'll find them. There's also a Facebook page, but LinkedIn is where primarily I'm trying to make more connections and build an audience over there, since it is more business oriented. I have found, and I don't know if you have found this, that engagement on Facebook is not what it used to be. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think a lot of people have dropped off of Facebook for many different reasons, but Facebook wants you to pay money to get everything in front of people. And that's, kind of a challenge. So LinkedIn, I've spent a lot more time over there. And that's actually, I think, been the most lucrative area of social media right now. So that's where I post coding tips. I have Coding Tip Tuesday, Q&A Thursday, and just share like other, relevant industry information. So I think that's the most. I do have put it on my Facebook page, but again, you're probably not going to see it on Facebook, even though I'm sharing it over there.
All right. Well, thank you, Stacie, so much. I'll include some of the links that I have for you and for the discounted programs that you offer to my viewers through our agreement in the video description. So you'll be able to find that information there. Again, thank you so much, Stacie. I really appreciate you taking your time out to meet with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to leave all the links in the description of where you can connect with Stacie, where you can purchase her courses on interventional radiology, as well as her podcast, Who Cares What Stacie Says. That's one you may be interested in if you are looking to grow as a medical coder. I will see you guys in the next video. And until then, just keep on coding on.